This is Distant Replay, the podcast that goes back in time to relive all the greatest events that we witnessed in sports. From upsets, to championships, to cultural moments, we discuss it all. Coming up on today's episode.
Based on Keith's writ, we are currently investigating Johnathan McCarty as a possible alternate suspect in the Greg Kelley case.
I didn't suspect Johnathan at the very beginning. I was hearing it. It was a rumor. I say, all right, okay, what's this about? What's up with this guy? Let's check him out.
Welcome into Distant Replay podcast. We're continuing our conversations on Outcry, the documentary on Showtime. You can watch it now. It's up there. All 5 episodes are complete, but we're taking it episode by episode and giving our thoughts on each one as it happens, on the case, on the trial, on everything in the story as we move along. I am Ben George. He is Mike Noto. So, Mike, we move into episode 2. I was ready to watch this one immediately. So I'm glad that we did very quickly, and I'm glad that we started filling in some of the gaps in the story.
Yeah, I mean, if you listen to our episode 1 recap, okay, of this documentary, we had a lot of questions at the end of that podcast. And very quickly here in episode 2, we started to get some of those questions answered. So this is going to definitely fill in some gaps.
Yeah, so now the trial's behind us, the convictions happened, and now it's kind of a look back at where things went wrong during this episode, how the case and the trial was kind of mishandled along the way, how Greg was really not done any favors along the way in this process. So off the bat, we're introduced to Keith Hampton, a lawyer who seems like a very sharp guy, very, very sharp in terms of the appeal process, very detail-oriented, very diligent. He seems like the kind of guy you'd want to have on your side, Mike, because he went through this entire process and looked through every bit of detail, to find out, hey, just how guilty is Greg. I need to figure out exactly what he might have done wrong. But he did simple things like go through this guy's phone and kind of get a better idea of who he is, see if he said anything that might have been incriminating, but also get a better idea of his personality. And then number 2, to figure out exactly where he was when this accusation happened. Simple stuff that I was just like, how did this not happen the first time?
I know. So this Keith Hampton gets introduced to this case by Greg's trial attorney, Patricia Cumming. This, like you mentioned, Ben, this guy, Keith Hampton, comes across great. I mean, very sharp, very experienced in the appellate courts, very experienced overturning wrongful convictions. And his approach, you ever know when someone's so good at something that their approach is so simple, but it seems so brilliant that they drill down to exactly what's important for what they're trying to do?
Right.
That's the impression I got from Keith Hampton. I mean, how did it happen? First of all, did it happen and how did it happen? Were the first 2 things that he was trying to ascertain.
Right.
And involved in that is, the first thing is, when did it happen, as opposed to when the allegations were made. And this is the first what the F moment I had watching this documentary. I think you know what I'm about to go into, okay? Mm-hmm. In the police report, they stated that the incident happened on July 12th, okay? Greg moved out of the McCarty household on June 11th. So right there, we have a month that Greg is not living in the house anymore, and the accusation happens a month after that. That was the first moment where I was like, what the F? Mm-hmm. That took me back, and I was like, okay, here we go. Now we're going to get into what really happened here. Yeah,
and not only that, that's the date that we think it might have happened. And again, you don't know because the boy doesn't have a timeline, right? So they kind of have to narrow it down to when we think about when it was. But usually I think they narrowed it down to a 5-day window essentially, but they went with July 12th. So, Keith Hampton even goes back and looks through his phone to even see what he was doing that day. So even if he wasn't living there, what was he doing that day? Well, he was helping his brother move. He was on the road. He sent a picture to his girlfriend. Hey, I'm stuck in traffic. Like everything matched up, and just told you he wasn't around when this accusation allegedly happened. So again, I'm like, this seems like lawyer 101, attorney 101, right? Defense 101. And I don't know how this was overlooked in the first case. It's just simple stuff, Mike. Like, where were you when it happened, right? What's your alibi? That's like where you start. Like, I don't have a law degree, but that's the first question you ask, right?
It would seem to be. And again, it's just a very simple thing. Let's start with the basics. Don't assume anything. That's the approach this guy Keith Hampton took. And we find this out right off the bat. And then we find out, we get introduced more to this Chris Daly, who was the actual detective, who didn't do much detecting, if we're being honest.
No.
This guy literally did no investigation. And we're going to find out more about that later in this episode when we get to a hearing that Greg had, which I will go into in more detail then. But we get introduced to Chris Daly, who, to me, if he's not the biggest goat so far in this documentary, he's pretty high up there.
Yeah, he's got an early case for that. So Keith's going through all this stuff. He also is trying to reach out to the DA, Jana Duty, to show her the evidence. He says he put this huge PowerPoint together, sat down with her, and just a few slides in, she says, I'm not interested. We believe the children. So again, she brushes off all this stuff, not looking for the correct answer, very satisfied with what they had found out so far. So that's the first part of this. Then we move into the interview tactics used on children. And we have a Dr. Kamala London. She's an expert in this area about how you talk to children, how you investigate and interview children to get the correct answers rather than leading children into answers, because they're obviously they're very naive, right? And they can be convinced one thing or another along the way. Not that that's what happened in this case, but you have to be very careful and very delicate with how you handle this. So I thought this was very interesting, Mike, because I go back through and we learn a lot about just these kind of cases in general, how, children can kind of change their story, how whatever that recovery facility was, Keith Hampton says that 50% of those cases, the children's story isn't exactly what happened. That's a pretty big deal, because you also have, like Lindsey Armstrong saying, 99% of the time the accuser is correct. So there's this kind of gap of, how frequent does this happen versus how often do children kind of misinterpret what's going on.
Yeah, and this lady Kamala comes off very good in this documentary. And her point is, you're not trying to underscore the child's story, but you want to make sure you're getting the correct story, and again, her approach, very simple, but makes a lot of sense. And her commentary on how the interviews were done with the boys in this case sort of opened my eyes. And it sort of went back and discussed the different research that has been done over the years about how kids, their reliability in situations like this isn't the best. And it's a delicate balance, right? Because you don't want to completely unsubstantiate what they have to say, but you want to make sure, due to the consequences for the people they're accusing, that you're getting the actual story and you're not getting a story that you sort of led them to believe or led them to say. And I think that was the main issue with the way these kids were questioned from what I got from this part of the doc. Yeah,
and then, Officer Daly, they show his interview with the second boy. Now, he comes in, and after this boy had denied the abuse twice, this is when he comes in, which is very questionable, number one, right? Like, why do you feel like you need to get another answer out of this child than what he's providing at this point? He came in with his gun on his hip, very intimidating. Obviously, a child at 4 years old, a police officer, a big police officer with his gun, pushing him. And, it seemed like he was asking the questions until he got an answer that he wanted to hear. And you kind of got that sense, and that's really what they were presenting here in this case. And you kind of get that sense from the officers too, because the main officer who we hear from, I guess it's the chief of police, right? We hear from quite a bit in this. They even asked him, like, hey, this boy even talked about a fight that happened between Greg and his mother. Do you believe that fight occurred? Oh, no, I think the boy made that up. But you can distinguish that tale versus the sexual accusation and that being true. Well, yeah, I mean, we believe that part of it happened. And again, you're kind of like, okay, here we go.
Yeah, and the second accuser, so just to go back to what Ben said before, this is the second accuser, okay, who last episode, remember we discussed, he recanted his accusation that Greg, touched him basically at the trial. We went through that last. But the second accuser was interviewed 3 separate occasions. This wasn't a third interview in a matter of a day. 3 separate occasions. He denied it at first on all 3 occasions. Then Daly comes in, that buffoon. He comes in with his gun on his hip and is talking to this young kid like he's talking to an adult, right, with the way he's questioning him. And basically, the kid is still denying anything happened when Daly first questions him, but Daly keeps on framing his questions in a way, and the kid, to eventually get the kid to say what he wants the kid to say. And this is the main evidence or whatever you want to call it that really leads down the road to Greg Kelley getting convicted.
Yep.
And that lady Kamala says, she's been doing this for 20 years and it's the worst interview she's ever seen. That to me holds a lot of weight.
Yeah, that says something. And to me, again, this is where I start thinking back to what I mentioned in the first episode. The Cedar Park aspect of this, like, where does that come in? And this is a Cedar Park officer. Like, I don't know if they had, and to me, maybe this is a stretch on my part. But again, it's like, how much does that aspect of it pull into where the Cedar Park versus Leander side of things? Like, is this a kid that you want to kind of maybe go after because he's at that rival school? And look, I don't know that Officer Daly had anything to do with that rivalry, right? But again, to me, in like the back of my mind, I'm thinking, well, how much does that rivalry play into it? Where this is a kid, a big football star on the other side of the tracks, so to speak. We can't trust him. You know what I mean? Like, does that play any role in this?
Look, at best, Chris Daly is really bad at his job, and at worst, he's a crook based on what he did here.
Right.
And the thing, what I get focused on is, first of all, I think the Cedar Park Leander storyline was introduced right at the top of this documentary, and we're going to get to how that sort of is connected. And I don't think we've gotten there yet. But the problem I have with this is, odds are something happened to these kids, right? Something like who did it, where they did it, when they did it. I think we're still trying to figure out. But I'm still under the impression that something happened to these kids. We just don't know exactly what, and we probably don't have the full story yet, which makes the way that he questioned that young kid, you could even see the kid's face was blurred out in the interview, obviously, but you could just see how nervous the kid was.
Right.
I don't understand how the detective and the counselor in the room, first of all, why the counselor even let the detective in the room is another story. But it's very, very frustrating to see something like that happen to a young kid.
So then we also kind of start getting the credibility of the Williamson County DA's office questioned a little bit here as well. Not that we didn't already have that, but now we get this, Jake Bryden presents the guy defending Greg and fighting for Greg. This video gets sent to him that was leaked from the Williamson County office that was apparently played at a Christmas party, kind of one of those like, hey, let's have a fun look back at the year, poke fun at some of the people that we prosecuted along the way. And it's a very bad look because, they mocked a lot of the people in the involved in these cases. And when this was put out, Jake even said, like, people thought we made this. That's how bad it looked, that we were making a parody video of this office. But no, this is what they presented. So that was kind of the first knock against this office. The second one was the fact that Janet Duty, the DA, gets sent to jail for contempt of court, okay? Gets out and then goes right back in for the same charge. Hello, this woman has some huge credibility issues.
If you thought she had any credibility before this, which is questionable, it's completely blown to smithereens at this point. You must think you're pretty far above the law to think even showing a video like that highlight reel you just talked about, even showing that to your office, you must have a pretty big ego and think you're just above the law. She didn't have the respect of her staff as much as she thought she had, obviously, because someone leaked that video. And when you get into the whole contempt of court thing she went to jail for, she basically did exactly what she platformed against to get elected.
Right.
So again, you have her serving 2 different stints for contempt. And now we go down the road of her sort of becoming out of this story for now, at least. And we get introduced to the new DA, Shaun Dick.
Yeah. Shaun Dick comes in and wins the position. I mean, obviously, how could anybody come in there and not win based on what Jana Duty had done? But he comes in and immediately, once he did, he meets with Hampton, sits down with the lawyer, Keith Hampton, hears his side of the story. And immediately there's enough red flags there that he's like, okay, we need to look into this. And I like his approach that, hey, either we want to look into this and show everybody that we got it right the first time, or if we didn't, let's get this thing corrected. So he automatically has the right approach right away. So you kind of like where this is kind of shifting where it's heading. And it seems like maybe justice could be not too far behind. So as we meet him, we also learn about the next person of interest, Mike. And I don't think I was ready for it, but it made a lot of sense in retrospect. But Johnathan McCarty, Shama's son, Greg's friend, Gabriel's friend, he becomes a person of interest. And now we introduced to him and his whole backstory, right? He's been arrested, 16 times already? And you have the motive there, right? I mean, the kid this jealous of the way his mom's kind of taking to Greg, kind of raising Greg as her son now, and maybe overlooking him a little bit. And to me, and I thought this from episode 1, I didn't mention it, I didn't think about it at the time, but these two guys look very similar. Like there was pictures of them when they were younger that I wasn't sure who they were showing, Greg or Johnathan.
Yeah, if you think about it, and Greg actually refers to him as his little brother. And that's exactly what it looks like. Johnathan looked like a less athletic version of Greg, but they had like the same haircut.
Right.
Again, they look pretty similar. And I agree with you on that. And look, that, Keith Hampton goes to the DA, sort of lays out all of his evidence, and included in his evidence is, naming this Johnathan McCarty as another possible suspect in this. That's what gets the investigation going on Johnathan McCarty. And it seems like Johnathan McCarty was just a kid who started off high school, very buttoned up, close friends, football player, respectful, and then just started hanging out with the wrong crowd, started getting obviously very jealous of Greg's athletic achievements, Greg's situation that he had a girlfriend that maybe Johnathan, was fond of, his mother showing attention to Greg, maybe more so than her during the time when Greg lived there. So you have all this stuff sort of playing in, and sort of we begin to see, and then the character stuff about him in present day, where he's been arrested, like you said, north of 15 times.
And the other big thing about this was, Hampton goes, let me go look at this actual house and kind of get a better idea of how the kid describes it versus what he's describing inside the home. Well, it comes to find out that the couch room, the coach's room with the trophies, all those things describe the room that Johnathan stayed in. Again, another huge potential argument for Greg Kelley. Again, something else that you're just like, how was this not looked into by somebody the first time around? So all that's enough now to get this writ hearing for Greg Kelley in August of 2017. Now, he's been in there for 3 years now, which sucks and which is awful. But he's getting a chance now, this hearing, to figure out whether or not they're going to proceed with this case. So we start learning a little bit more, Mike. This is, again, where it gets very, very interesting. So you mentioned that date, July 12th, is when the accusation happened. Well, when they go back into this, and we find out in the trial, right, that when they were going through this, they could have gone back through at any point between December. They said the accusation could happen anytime. The event could happen anytime between December 2012 and July of 2013 when the accusation was made. They pinpointed April 15th. And I'm not sure why this wasn't pointed out more the first time, but they pointed out April 15th as the date. And as they point out, as Hampton points out, it seems like the prosecution learned after the fact that Greg had moved out of the house before July. So they had to go back in time and kind of pinpoint at a time kind of that fell in between that window where they didn't have any worries that Greg was going to be around.
Exactly. You know how I said earlier that my first what the F moment was that he moved out of the house a month earlier?
Yeah.
Well, I think Jana and all her cronies had that same moment while they were at the point of no return when they were going to take this kid to trial. And like you said, it literally seemed like they threw a dart at a dartboard and hit on April 15th and decided on that date. It's just one of those things where, you have that aspect of it, the date aspect. The next shocking moment to me was, and I didn't even think about it when we were going through the trial last episode, was that there was no in-court identification of Greg Kelley by the accusers. They were on closed circuit television when they were testifying in the trial. No pictures of Greg were ever even shown to the accusers for identification. Everyone just assumed they meant Greg Kelley. That and the date that we just mentioned, the date issues, to me are absolutely eye-popping and seem very elementary parts of investigating a crime, especially a crime with this serious of a punishment attached to it. And it gets back to Chris Daly says as much in the hearing. He didn't go to the house to investigate at all. He did not go to Shama's house at all. He did not ask who was living in the house at the time. Had he done basic investigation tactics, this could have turned out completely differently in the first couple hours of the investigation.
Yeah. So this is the ending of this episode is kind of mind blowing because of the stuff you just mentioned. And to me, and I kind of touched on this a little bit last time, like there was a lot of unanswered questions about how Greg became this obvious pedophile, right? Like how is he the person that gets convicted here so clearly? And, Officer Daly obviously looks awful in this whole process. Like he picked up the paperwork, signed off on it, and passed it over to the DA. Hey, let's take care of this. And that was about it. There was no legwork done. So again, I point to Patricia, that, his defense lawyer at the time. It's one thing for the investigator not to do his job, but the fact that you can't defend this kid and point out all these issues just makes no sense to me. You have to be intentionally doing that at some point, because how could you not point out the fact that you didn't go to his house? How do you know this is the same guy? Did you ever look at Greg? Did you ever identify him? All that stuff seems, again, basic attorney 101 stuff to me. And then we get the last bombshell at the very end, which again, to me, blew my mind when I hear it. That during this interview with Officer Daly, we saw part of it last time, right? And we saw this big focus of it at the beginning of this episode. During that, as he's asking about this event with Greg, he says, was it Mr. Greg or was it Mr. Johnathan? He brings up Johnathan McCarty's name for the first time in this whole case, why his name being part of this investigation. And then the boy even says, Mr. Jonathan's the one that gave me the lotion. Mike, how is that not the biggest part of this interview?
And there's no investigation done into follow-up on the kid saying that, right? There's no follow-up at all. I don't think there's any, I think Keith Hampton said there was no mention of Johnathan in any of the court documents or transcripts or anything. It was just a statement that Chris Daly was asked if he investigated it during this writ hearing, and he said no. And to me, now we're bordering on, I don't know what the crime would be that he's committing here, this guy Chris Daly, but now we're getting to the point of intentionally, intentionally withholding things to make your case look stronger to the guy you want to pinpoint who did this. And now we're getting into some other territory here that I think we'll get into further in future episodes.
Yeah, so there's a lot, man. This episode finished off on a high note, and I'd be hard-pressed to believe this doesn't get to a trial beyond this. But just this simple investigation by Keith Hampton has pulled back the curtain on a lot of issues in this case that I can't believe got through the cracks at all without there being some intentional motive on both sides of this, right? And Greg seems like a victim right now. So who knows if that will continue or not, but there's still a lot of unanswered questions.
Yeah, we'll see how we get into sort of the rulings from this writ hearing and how the case unfolds from here. But this episode, Keith Hampton, definitely the star of it, and revealing a lot of things and answering a lot of questions that we had from episode 1. And again, I just can't wait till episode 3.
Yeah, same here. So we'll have that episode coming up next, along with 4 and 5 as well. So stay tuned to Distant Replay Podcast for all the recap. And we'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well if you watch this documentary. It's been a great one so far. Can't wait to see what comes down the road. So make sure you hit subscribe. You can find us on distantreplaypodcast.com, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube as well, all 3 of those parts. So Mike, another great show, another great episode. Looking forward to talking to you again about episode 3.
Absolutely, Benny. Until next time. And again, very interested to hear what you guys think about the first 2 episodes. Until next time.